Hello, everyone. Welcome to an installation of Phonetics 2, Phonétique et Production Orale 2. Today, these classes will be given just in short installations. I hope you will be able to follow them. It's a little bit, probably a little bit less obvious. Not the easiest conditions. I'll be writing on these little pieces of paper. And I don't know. This should help you to understand what's going on. Keep going with the class. And also, if you have any questions, you can make comments on. No nasty comments, please. But you can make comments on the YouTube site, I guess I should say. Okay. So this little installation will be about compounds, right? Which you can find on page 41 of the page 41 of the brochure. And also you can practice by doing exercises on page 23. There's a series of exercises where there are sentences with compounds in them, and it's I'll ask you to try to identify them and then also indicate stress pattern, things about word stress in those compounds. So here we are. So we're on page 41. So it might be easier for you. It might be a good idea. For example, you can hit pause for this video, and you might want to read the section on compounds in the brochure, section 7. You might want to hit pause, read that now. I'm going to go. I will explain this. This will just be I would say I will not. I'll give a sort of a more overall. We'll start by giving a wider explanation of these compounds, but the basics are here. Okay, so obviously the first question is, what is a compound? And it is not entirely obvious because compounds are a lot like what we've seen before in words with separable prefixes and words with neutral endings. If you remember, in both of those, words with separable prefixes and words with neutral endings, we said that the word has sort of two parts, and each part has a meaning, right? So, for example, to give an example of a word with, and we looked at this in the scope of two-syllable words, a word with a separable prefix, we could give a word like unwind, right? And I'll write it here, I'm writing 2-1, right? Okay, backwards, right? Unwind, right? And so the idea is that this word has two parts, right? You have that first part, un, right? And that second part, wind, right? So this is just a review. I'm reviewing, separable prefixes here, right? And what I'd like to argue is you might think that is a compound, because you can say, well, there are two parts to that word, right? But here it isn't a compound, because even though the second part, wind, which is the root of the word, even though that can exist as a word, to wind. And here, by the way, we're talking, wind means, in French, I think we would say tortiller or embobiner. So this second part actually exists as a word, right? I wound the rope, right? He is winding the rope, or something like that, right? Winding the wire. Okay, but the first part, un, doesn't exist by itself, right? It only exists as a prefix, right? Okay, and for example, we could separate it with another prefix like rewind, right? Okay, unwind, rewind. Okay, so that means that un is not not a word. It's a prefix. Prefixes are dependent. Now we distinguished separable prefixes from inseparable prefixes in saying that separable prefixes do have meaning, right? Un means the opposite of wind, right? Okay, whereas inseparable prefixes do not, right? If I say, for example, reply, doesn't mean anything, right? So it might be easy to confuse things, right? So what we're saying is that we have already seen parts of words that have meaning, right? And we've already seen the case of what we call a separable prefix, un. In this case, un is a separable prefix, right? Because it has meaning. Now, likewise, we saw the same type of thing at work with neutral endings, and that would be an example of that would be I can say something. We can say that there has one way of saying that there has been a lot going on this week would be to say that this week has been, I could say, eventful, right? Here we go. I'll write the word eventful with the stress pattern, right? Okay. So what we can see here is we have another case of eventful is one word, right? Just one word. And there are two parts to it. There's the event part, right? Okay, which we can think of once again as being sort of, we could call that the root, even though is a little bit of a prefix, right? But that's that is sort of the more substantial part of the word event, right? And then we have the full part, right, which is a suffix or an ending. And here we say it's a neutral ending because if we will remember our definition, full, never stressed, never affects the stress pattern, right? And if you remember what we saw when we looked at the definition of a neutral ending was that it is always adjoined to something that is already a word. So event is a word, right? So this is just like what happens with unwind. Wind is a word, right? But full, in this case, notice it's just F-U-L. It isn't F-U-L-L, which is a word, right? But full doesn't exist by itself. It's a dependent element, just like in unwind, right? So that's just to say that event could be a word. In other contexts, event can be a word, but full in this form, right, will never be a word. Like when we looked at hood, neighborhood, meaning, notice we're not talking about hood that means capuche, right? Or when we looked at more, more obviously grammatical endings such as ed or ing, walking, right? Ing is going to be an ending, and of course, ing doesn't exist by itself, right? Okay, so that's one thing. So we've already seen, right, when we've looked at words, we've looked at the morphology of the word, the way that these words are kind of made up. So we've already seen this, right? But we've only seen it when words have different parts of the words have meaning. We've only seen it in the case of prefixes and suffixes, right? So now we're going to move on to a compound. A compound is different. It's because each part is actually, or can be, we can say, a separate word. So let's look at an example of that. A really obvious example would be something like blackbird. Okay. So here we have blackbird. So you can obviously see that the first element, black, can be a word, right? And the second element, bird, can be a word. So that means we're dealing with a compound here. We're not dealing with a prefix or a suffix. Okay, that's the first thing. Now the second part is, of course, seeing as black can be an individual word, and bird can also be an individual word. Each of those elements has meaning, right? So what happens is we can say that the original in the compound, the original meaning of each word is sort of subordinated to the meaning of the whole. And we could say also in a sense that the individual elements sort of lose their original meaning. And they're no longer as descriptive as they might have been. So for example, I could say, look, there is, oh, look, I see a black bird flying. And what I'm saying there, that this bird it's not a red bird, it's not a yellow bird. So that means if I say a black, and that's not going to be a compound, and you can hear it in the intonation. Look, a black bird. Both elements receive primary stress. A black, primary stress, bird, primary stress. Because each meaning, each word has its full meaning, right? So it's not a compound, right? And we can see that the stress reflects that, right? We have primary stress black, right? Primary stress bird. Okay, that each word has a full meaning, right? Whereas in blackbird, notice, by the way, we would translate this into French, but I think the best